There's a good chance you've already eaten at least one fake food today. Not junk food, not takeaways, something you genuinely believe is normal and maybe even healthy. The reason most people don't realize they're eating it is simple. Fake food doesn't look fake anymore. It looks fresh, it looks clean, it looks like something you've eaten your whole life. And because it all feels so normal, no one thinks to question it. In this video, I'm exposing 10 fake foods sold in the UK that millions of people eat regularly without realizing what they actually are. These aren't rare products. They're everyday items like coffee, tea bags, and olive oil, hiding behind familiar packaging and trusted labels. After that, I'll give you 3 foods you should be eating instead. Simple upgrades that dramatically reduce your exposure to fake food. And finally, I'll show you how to spot most fake foods instantly, so you're never fooled at the supermarket again. Let's get started. Fake food. 10. Sushi and fish swapping. Sushi has earned a reputation in the UK as one of the healthier takeaway options. It's light, it's fresh, and compared to greasy fast food, it feels like a smart choice. Raw fish, rice, and seaweed look simple and honest, which is why people trust it so easily. Supermarkets sell it. High street chains sell it. Restaurants charge premium prices for it. Most people assume that if it's raw and expensive, it must be authentic. That assumption is exactly why sushi is one of the easiest foods to fake. In the sushi world, there is a widespread practice known as fish swapping. It means the fish you order is not always the fish you are served. Cheaper species are routinely substituted for more expensive ones, often hidden behind vague menu descriptions that are technically legal. One of the biggest offenders is something often sold as white tuna, which doesn't actually exist as a real type of tuna. In many cases, it's a completely different fish sold under a misleading name. The risk increases dramatically once fish is chopped up. When it's minced, mixed into rolls, or covered in sauces, you lose your only line of defense: visual identification. Once the fish is no longer whole, you have no way of knowing what species you're actually eating. This is why mixed rolls and supermarket sushi are especially vulnerable to substitution. This isn't a rare issue. Multiple investigations in major cities have repeatedly found high levels of mislabeling in sushi restaurants. Customers are paying premium prices while unknowingly eating lower quality fish, sometimes species with higher mercury levels or known digestive side effects. The smaller the piece of fish, the bigger the mystery. This matters because repeated exposure adds up. Lower quality fish can mean higher heavy metal intake, increased inflammation, digestive discomfort, and poorer fat profiles. When sushi becomes a weekly habit, especially the convenient pre-made versions, those risks compound quietly over time. People think they're choosing something healthy when in reality they're trusting sourcing they can't see. Sushi fraud thrives on chopped fish, vague descriptions, and blind trust. The cleaner and more harmless it looks, the easier it is to hide what's really inside. What comes next is something most households buy without hesitation and often give to children, believing it's one of the healthiest choices you can make. Fake food. 9. Fruit juice. From concentrate. Fruit juice has one of the cleanest reputations in the UK. It's associated with breakfast, vitamins, and childhood. Many people see it as a healthy habit, especially when the label shows apples, oranges, or words like no added sugar. Parents pour it for their kids, believing it's a safer alternative to fizzy drinks. Adults drink it, thinking it counts toward their daily fruit intake. But this is where the illusion begins. Most fruit juice sold in supermarkets is made from concentrate, not from fresh fruit. That means the juice is stripped down, heated, stored for long periods, and then reconstituted with water before it ever reaches the shelf. During this process, much of the natural nutrition is lost. What's left is essentially fruit-flavored sugar water, often blended from concentrates sourced across multiple countries. Labels make this hard to spot. From concentrate is legally required, but it's easy to miss, and many people don't realize what it actually means. Even juices marketed as pure or 100% fruit can still come from concentrate. In some cases, the fruit used may be grown far from the UK, processed elsewhere, and blended repeatedly before bottling. From a health perspective, this matters more than people realize. Fruit juice, especially from concentrate, delivers a high dose of sugar without the fiber that whole fruit provides. That sugar hits the bloodstream quickly, spiking blood glucose and insulin levels. Over time, frequent consumption is linked to weight gain, fatty liver stress, and increased risk of metabolic issues. For children, regular juice consumption is associated with dental decay and poor appetite regulation. The problem is quantity and frequency. When juice becomes a daily habit, especially for kids, it quietly replaces better options. People think they're doing something healthy while unknowingly training their bodies to crave liquid sugar disguised as fruit. This deception works because juice feels natural. It looks wholesome. It's been normalized for decades, but the processing, sourcing, and sugar load tell a very different story once you look past the front label. And coming up next is a food many people sprinkle onto meals every single day, assuming it's simple and pure, yet it's often bulked out with things you would never expect to be eating. Fake food. 8. Grated Parmesan and Italian-style cheese. Grated Parmesan has been a staple in UK kitchens for decades. It feels harmless, familiar, and convenient. You shake it over pasta, pizza, salads, and soups without thinking twice. The packaging leans heavily on Italian imagery, words like classic, authentic, or Italian style, and most people assume it's simply cheese that's been grated for convenience. But in most cases, that's not what it is. Shelf-stable grated Parmesan, sold in tubs or sachets, is rarely real Parmesan at all. True Parmesan, known legally as Parmigiano Reggiano, can only be made in specific regions of Italy under strict standards. What's sold on many UK shelves is a loose interpretation. Cheese made elsewhere, processed heavily, and labelled in a way that sounds close enough to pass. The bigger issue is what's added to keep it shelf stable. These products often contain anti-caking agents designed to stop the cheese from clumping. One of the most common is cellulose, a plant fiber derived from wood pulp. It's legal, it's cheap, and it allows manufacturers to bulk out the product while maintaining the appearance of cheese. In some cases, a noticeable percentage of what you're sprinkling isn't cheese at all. From a health perspective, this matters less because cellulose is toxic and more because it's a marker of ultra-processing. The cheese itself is usually made from lower quality milk, stripped of complexity, and processed to the point where flavor is sacrificed for shelf life. People end up using more of it to get taste, increasing sodium intake without the satisfaction of real cheese. There's also a financial deception at play. You're paying for convenience, fillers, and branding, not quality. A real Parmigiano Reggiano is richer, more flavorful, and more satisfying in smaller amounts. Yet many households rely on inferior substitutes without realizing what they're missing. This kind of product survives because it's normalized. It's always been there. No one questions it. But once you understand how real Parmesan is made and stored, it becomes clear that shelf-stable grated versions are a compromise disguised as tradition. And next, we're moving into the spice cupboard, where one of the most commonly used ingredients in the country is almost never what people think it is. Fake food. 7. Ground cinnamon. Cinnamon feels about as simple and natural as it gets. It's associated with baking, porridge, hot drinks, and comfort foods. People sprinkle it over breakfast, add it to desserts, and even use it for supposed health benefits. Because it's a spice that's been around forever, most people assume cinnamon is just cinnamon. But in the UK, what's sold as cinnamon is almost never the real thing. There are actually different types of cinnamon, and the one most people are familiar with is the cheaper, harsher variety known as cassia. This is what dominates supermarket shelves, especially when cinnamon is sold pre-ground. True cinnamon, called Ceylon cinnamon, is far more delicate, aromatic, and expensive, and it's rarely labelled clearly if it's stocked at all. Once cinnamon is ground into powder, there's no easy way for the consumer to tell the difference. The packaging almost never specifies the type, which allows inferior cinnamon to be sold as if it were the real thing. This isn't illegal. It's simply a case of consumers not being told what they're actually buying. From a health perspective, this matters because cassia cinnamon contains significantly higher levels of compounds that can be harmful when consumed frequently in large amounts. For people who use cinnamon daily, in drinks, oats, baking, or supplements, this exposure can quietly add up over time. Beyond that, cassia lacks the flavor complexity of true cinnamon, meaning people often use more of it to get the same taste. The deception here isn't dramatic, but it's constant. Millions of people are consuming a lower quality spice every day, believing it's the same ingredient used traditionally for centuries. It's a small difference that becomes a big one through repetition. This works because ground spices remove transparency. Once something is powdered, origin, quality, and authenticity are easy to hide. Cinnamon is a perfect example of how food can be legally misleading while still feeling completely normal. Coming up next is something many adults rely on every morning just to function. Yet once it's altered in a certain way, it becomes one of the most vulnerable foods to fraud. Fake food. 6. Pre-ground coffee. Coffee is part of daily life for millions of people in the UK. It's routine, comforting, and for many, non-negotiable. Whether it's the first cup in the morning or a mid-afternoon boost, coffee feels familiar and trustworthy. Bags of ground coffee line supermarket shelves, marketed as rich, smooth, premium, or artisan. Most people assume it's simply roasted beans that have been ground for convenience. But once coffee is pre-ground, it becomes one of the easiest foods in the world to manipulate. Coffee is one of the most expensive agricultural products globally, and wherever there's money, there's incentive to cut corners. When coffee is sold whole, the beans are visible. You can see exactly what you're buying. But when it's ground into a fine powder, that transparency disappears completely. At that point, consumers have no visual way to confirm what's actually in the bag. This creates an opportunity for fraud. In the past, investigations have found ground coffee diluted with non-coffee materials, such as husks, grains, or other plant matter. These additions are cheap, hard to detect once ground, and allow manufacturers or suppliers to stretch product further without obvious signs. Even when outright adulteration isn't happening, pre-ground coffee goes stale far more quickly, losing its natural oils and flavor long before it's opened. From a health and quality standpoint, this matters because people often compensate for weak or stale coffee by drinking more of it. More cups, stronger brews, higher caffeine intake, all to chase the flavor and effect that fresh coffee naturally provides. Over time, this can contribute to jitteriness, poor sleep, and dependency without the satisfaction of a genuinely good cup. The problem isn't that all pre-ground coffee is fake, but that once coffee is ground, the consumer is forced to rely entirely on trust. You're trusting the supply chain, the processing, and the honesty of a product you can no longer verify with your own eyes. This is how everyday foods become vulnerable, not through dramatic scandals, but through small changes that remove transparency while keeping the routine intact. And next is another kitchen staple that looks impossible to fake. Yet once it's ground, it becomes just as easy to cut, dilute, and misrepresent. Fake food 5. Ground black pepper. Black pepper is one of the most common ingredients in UK kitchens. It's used daily, kept on tables, and added to almost every savoury meal. Because it's so basic and familiar, most people never question it. Pepper feels natural, simple, impossible to fake. But once pepper is ground, that trust becomes a problem. Whole peppercorns are easy to recognize. You can see them, you know what you're buying. But when pepper is reduced to a fine powder, all visual verification disappears. At that point, it becomes one of the easiest spices in the world to dilute without the consumer ever knowing. Investigations into the spice industry have repeatedly found ground pepper bulked out with cheaper materials such as papaya, seeds, husks, and other plant matter. These fillers are chosen because they closely resemble pepper once ground, making them almost impossible to detect at home. The result is a product that looks normal but delivers far less flavor and quality. This matters because pepper's value comes from its natural oils. Those oils give it aroma, heat, and depth. Once ground, those oils evaporate quickly. When the pepper tastes weak, people instinctively use more, unknowingly consuming more filler along with it. Over time, this becomes normal. People assume pepper just isn't very strong anymore. There's also a financial deception. You're paying for a spice that should be potent and aromatic, but often getting a diluted version that offers less flavor and less value. Grinding removes transparency, and once transparency is gone, quality becomes optional. And next is something woven deeply into British culture, a daily ritual millions of people rely on, that hides a quality problem most never think to question. Fake food. 4. Tea bags. Tea is more than a drink in the UK. It's a ritual. It's comfort, routine, and habit repeated multiple times a day in millions of households. Because it feels traditional and familiar, most people assume tea is pure, simple, and exactly what it claims to be. But most tea bags are not made from whole tea leaves. What's inside many tea bags is the lowest grade of tea produced. It's often referred to as dust or fannings, tiny fragments, broken leaves, and byproducts left over after higher quality tea has been sorted out. In some cases, it includes stems and other plant material. Once it's sealed inside a bag, you can't see the quality. And that's the point. If this is already changing how you see everyday foods, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps this channel keep exposing things most people never hear about. This low-grade tea brews very quickly, which is why tea bags are designed for speed, but fast brewing also means bitterness. To compensate, people add milk, sugar, or sweeteners, turning what feels like a healthy drink into something far less ideal. Over time, this becomes a daily source of unnecessary additives and poor quality caffeine. There's also a value issue. People assume they're paying for convenience, but they're often paying premium prices for inferior tea. Loose leaf tea, even in small amounts, delivers far more flavor, aroma, and satisfaction, yet many never try it because tea bags have been normalized as the default. The deception works because it's invisible. Once tea is crushed and sealed into a bag, quality becomes impossible to judge. What feels comforting and traditional is often just a heavily processed shortcut. And coming up next is a product many people believe is one of the healthiest fats you can buy, yet it's also one of the most commonly mislabeled foods on supermarket shelves. Fake food. 3. Extra virgin olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil is widely seen as one of the healthiest fats you can buy. It's associated with the Mediterranean diet, heart health, and longevity. Bottles are covered in words like cold-pressed, pure, and authentic, and many people assume that if it says extra virgin, it must be the real thing. But this is one of the most commonly mislabeled foods on supermarket shelves. In reality, a large portion of olive oil sold as extra virgin doesn't meet the standard people think it does. Many bottles contain oil that's been blended from multiple countries, refined, deodorized, or mixed with older, lower quality oils. These practices are difficult to detect because the final product still looks and tastes like olive oil to the average consumer. One of the biggest red flags is vague sourcing. When a label lists several countries of origin, it usually means the oil has been blended to keep costs low and supply consistent. That blending removes traceability and makes it harder to know how the olives were grown, harvested, or processed. Freshness matters with olive oil, and once it's old or poorly stored, it can become rancid long before you ever open the bottle. From a health perspective, this is a problem because oxidized or refined oils lose many of the benefits people buy olive oil for in the first place. Instead of protective antioxidants and healthy fats, you may be consuming an unstable oil that contributes to inflammation rather than reducing it. Over time, using poor quality oil daily adds up. The deception works because the term extra virgin sounds strict and regulated, even when enforcement is inconsistent. Most people trust the label and never question what's inside. Olive oil becomes a background ingredient used every day without scrutiny. And coming up next is a luxury product that commands high prices and fancy menus, yet almost never contains the ingredient it's named after. Fake food 2. Truffle oil. Truffle oil is sold as a luxury. It's used to make ordinary food feel premium, and the word truffle suggests rarity and quality. That's why people are willing to pay high prices for a small bottle. But almost all truffle oil is fake. Despite the name, most truffle oil contains little to no real truffle. Instead, it's made from ordinary oil infused with artificial or so-called natural flavor compounds designed to mimic the smell of truffles. These compounds are extremely strong, which is why a few drops can overpower a dish. That intensity is often mistaken for authenticity. Real truffles are seasonal, fragile, and expensive. They don't survive well in oil, and they don't produce the exaggerated aroma people expect. To recreate that smell cheaply and consistently, manufacturers rely on lab-made flavorings. Legally, this can still be sold as truffle oil, even when the connection to real truffles is minimal or symbolic. From a health and quality standpoint, this matters because artificial flavorings are designed to overstimulate your palate. Over time, they can make real food taste bland by comparison, pushing people to crave stronger, less natural flavors. Truffle oil also often uses low-grade olive oil underneath the flavoring, since defects are easily masked. The deception works because truffle oil feels indulgent and special. Few people question it, even though it rarely delivers what the name promises. And coming up next is a food many people buy for its health benefits, feed to their families regularly, and trust without hesitation, yet it's often the most misleading item on the list. Fake food. 1. Farmed salmon and processed fish. Salmon is widely viewed as one of the healthiest proteins you can eat. It's recommended for heart health, brain function, and overall nutrition. Supermarkets promote it as a smart, wholesome choice, and many families buy it weekly, believing they're doing something good for their health. But this is where trust breaks down. Most salmon sold in the UK is farmed, not wild. While farming itself isn't always bad, the quality varies enormously depending on conditions. In many cases, farmed salmon are raised in crowded pens, fed processed pellets, and treated to control disease and parasites. The result is a fish that looks healthy on the outside but is nutritionally different from what people assume they're buying. The problem becomes worse when fish is processed. Smoked salmon, fish cakes, fish fingers, and ready meal portions often use lower grade cuts, added oils, excess salt, and preservatives to mask quality issues. Once fish is chopped, mixed, or flavored, it becomes very difficult to judge freshness or sourcing. From a health perspective, this matters because farmed and heavily processed fish can contain higher levels of inflammatory fats while delivering fewer of the benefits people expect. When eaten regularly, especially in processed forms, it quietly undermines the very health goals people are trying to achieve. The deception works because salmon has a health halo. People trust it automatically. Labels are vague, farming practices are rarely explained, and processing hides most quality clues. What feels like the safest choice often receives the least scrutiny. This is why salmon sits at the top of this list. It's not because it's always bad, it's because it's trusted the most, questioned the least, and consumed the most often. After seeing how common these fake foods are, the goal isn't panic, it's control. You don't need to avoid entire supermarkets or memorize endless ingredients. A few smart replacements eliminate most of the deception automatically. Instead of focusing on what to cut out, focus on what to replace. Recommended food. 3. Whole, unprocessed foods. Whole foods look like what they are. Whole fish, whole fruit, whole spices, and whole cheese haven't been chopped, powdered, or blended beyond recognition. That matters because fake food thrives on processing. Once something is broken down, it becomes easy to hide substitutions and fillers. When you can see the ingredient clearly, you remove the opportunity to cheat. Whole foods also tend to be more satisfying and naturally limit overconsumption because they deliver real flavor and texture. If it still looks like the food it claims to be, you're already safer. Recommended food. 2. Single ingredient foods with clear origin. Choose foods with one ingredient and one clear source. coffee beans instead of ground coffee, loose-leaf tea instead of bags, olive oil from a single country, cheese with protected origin labels. Fake foods rely on blending and vague sourcing. Multiple countries and unclear origins make quality impossible to trace. Clear origin restores accountability and usually means fresher, better handled food. If a label avoids telling you where something comes from, that's often a warning sign. Recommended food 1. Fresh or freshly prepared foods. Fresh foods are the hardest foods to fake. They don't survive long shelf lives or heavy processing. Fresh fish, freshly grated cheese, and freshly brewed tea require real ingredients and real handling. Fake food needs time and stability to exist. Fresh food removes both. When food is prepared close to when you eat it, there's less room to hide poor quality or cut corners. Prioritize freshness and most fake food disappears on its own. How to spot fake foods in the UK. Now that you know what to replace fake food with, the last step is knowing how to spot it before it ever reaches your basket. You don't need to be an expert and you don't need to read every ingredient line. Most fake foods give themselves away if you know what to look for. Before we finish, if this video has been useful so far, take a second to like it and subscribe. It helps this channel keep breaking down things that directly affect your health and your family. The first rule is simple. Be suspicious of anything heavily processed. The more a food has been chopped, ground, blended, or stabilized, the easier it is to hide substitutions. Whole foods don't need disguises. Powdered and mixed foods often do. Next, always check the source. Fake foods thrive on vague labeling. Multiple countries of origin, unclear sourcing, or generic phrases usually mean blending and cost-cutting. When a label won't tell you where something comes from, it's often because the answer isn't reassuring. Another major red flag is shelf stability. Foods that should be fresh but last for months or years usually rely on processing, additives, or low-quality ingredients. Real food doesn't last forever, and that's a good thing. Finally, trust your instincts. If something is unusually cheap, intensely flavored, or marketed as premium without proof, it's worth questioning. Fake food often relies on branding and buzzwords to replace quality. Once you start shopping this way, it becomes automatic. You'll spot fake food instantly, avoid it without effort, and make better choices without spending more or overthinking every meal. If you found this helpful, like, subscribe, and share it with someone you shop or eat with. Most people are consuming these foods daily without realizing it, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.